welcome to Wrestling at Random. I'm Jeremy Deemer.
And I am Adam Summers.
And this is Season 3 of the Wrestling at Random podcast, which means we dumped everything into the randomizer. Weekly TV shows, big pay-per-view events, all kinds of territories, all kinds of eras. They all are dumped into the randomizer. We fire it up every week, and it picks us something totally at random to watch. And the randomizer doesn't disappoint again this week.
Yeah, well, it does or it doesn't, depending on your perspective. But the thing it does once again this week is prove its legitimacy as a true randomizer. As you said, it could be anything, both weekly TV or big events, pay-per-views. Everything is fair game here in Season 3, kind of combining the concepts of Season 1 and Season 2. And what is the randomizer poll for us this week? An episode of WWE television, but it's not what you're thinking. It's not Raw. It's not SmackDown. It's not Heat. It's not even Shotgun Saturday Night. We're not going back to the days of Superstars or Challenge or Primetime Wrestling or Tuesday Night Titans. What are we watching? What are we reviewing here after watching? An early episode of Velocity.
Velocity. From June 15th, 2002. Now, I remember the Velocity show as just like a random, it's that syndicated show vibe with just geeks on it. Like the C or D show when Raw's your A show and your B show is SmackDown. You go down the line until you get to the C and D show where Velocity would have been found.
Yeah, it was, my recollection of it as being like one step above like a Jacked or Metal where it was all just recaps, but it was guys who weren't getting pushed. And in some ways that made for a pretty entertaining show because it was kind of where the cruiserweights dwelled. Guys that weren't getting a push but were good wrestlers who would be on that show. That's what I was expecting here. But as you'll explain in your history of the Velocity program, here we're 1 month in, and this is a Velocity where WWE is still trying to make this a thing at this point.
So you mentioned the show Jacked. You mentioned the show Metal. Do you remember these shows? The Jacked show was renamed to WWE The Bottom Line, and the Metal
Wasn't there
show,
like an Afterburn or Afterburner as well.
It's like you're reading my notes. The Metal show has been renamed to WWE Afterburn at this point. Afterburn, Bottom Line, and Velocity will all share much of the same footage, which is the hour taped before the SmackDown shows. So when they would do SmackDown, hour before the show, they would tape this Velocity show, and they would air a bunch of the footage and do recaps on Afterburn and Bottom Line, and air the matches for Velocity.
I'll note before as you run through the history, but it just popped into my mind when we get to the actual show, is yes, this was taped prior to SmackDown, and unlike, let's say, NXT, the Wild and Young era of NXT, which we reviewed last season, or like an episode of Thunder, where they at least made like a cursory attempt, whether it be WWE or WCW, to change the visual look of the program. Other than the fact that the graphics are green instead of blue, it's the SmackDown set. They've got the SmackDown fist is on the set. Like, they don't even try to hide the fact that this is being taped before SmackDown. And again, this is in one of the very first weeks of this show when they were still trying.
Yeah, the show Velocity would air on TNN, the former Nashville network, the precursor to Spike TV. The
new TNN. I don't know what you're talking about. I heard it referred to as the new TNN over and over and over on this hour of wrestling television.
So Velocity on TNN replaced a show called WWE Excess. Not Access, Excess. EXC. Yes.
See, I have a hard time believing both that and Bottom Line were actual shows. I remember all the other ones, but Excess was a show?
Yes, and Velocity on TNN replaced that show. Velocity...
Wait, hold on. I have to go back to that. Sorry.
Yes.
Excess.
So
basically, they're telling you, like this is, you don't even need to see, like they could have called it WWE Superfluous if they wanted to be use more syllables. Wow, that's quite the name for a program.
So Velocity would be the first hour, replacing Excess, and then they were debuting a second hour show called Confidential. So this would be a 2-hour block of wrestling on TNN. Velocity followed by Confidential.
We will hear a lot about Confidential here on this episode of Velocity, almost as much as we hear about Velocity itself.
Yeah, Confidential was like that was their like news magazine show, like their attempt at like a TMZ type of show.
Oh, when it got TMZ, it was it definitely reached those heights or plumbed those depths, depending on your idea. We'll save that for more detail for whenever the randomizer pulls a Confidential show. But my only recollection of that was the horrible
Lex Luger and
Luger Elizabeth.
Miss Elizabeth one. Yep.
What a just reprehensible hour, half hour, whatever it was of television.
Yeah, don't say it too loud. I don't want the randomizer to hear. Velocity will feature matches with the SmackDown crew, and Confidential will do the personality features. That was the original plan. All the changes went into effect on May 25th, 2002. So this show that we're reviewing, June 15th, 2002. So we're less than a month in to all these new changes. Velocity was the taped before SmackDown, so it featured wrestlers from the SmackDown brand. And Sunday Night Heat, which we reviewed in season 2 of this podcast, Sunday Night Heat would be dedicated to the Raw brand of WWE.
Because this was at the point, we'll hear this throughout the show as we watched it, and you'll hear about it as you hear us review it. They were really, really, really still trying to push the brand extension hard here.
So in 2005, just shy of 3 years after this episode we're reviewing, Velocity was moved from TNN to become a webcast on WWE.com. Again, in 2005, not something that people were doing. We're watching webcasts on a browser.
2005. That's even earlier than, because we talked about the same thing with the was it the WWE ECW?
Yes, because in 2005, Velocity was moved to a webcast on WWE.com because they relaunched ECW in that time slot. So with the relaunch of ECW, Velocity was canceled.
Imagine being the show that got bumped for WWE's version of ECW. How depressing would it be if that show was a person? That would be rough to recover from.
So the Velocity was canceled. The last episode streamed on WWE.com on June 11th, 2006. So just shy of 4 years after the episode we're going to review here today. The show opens with clips of The Rock and Hulk Hogan, Triple H, Kurt Angle. There's no way that these guys are going to appear on this show ever. There's no way.
Well, stay tuned, because at least one will in this hour.
So we're Velocity on TNN. Your commentators are Michael Cole and Taz. So already we're off to a good start.
Taz filling in for regular color commentator Al Snow.
Al Snow has the week off.
That's never a bad sentence to hear.
This is an upgrade. This is an upgrade having Taz over Al Snow.
Oh, it's an upgrade in a vacuum. Taz over Al Snow as a color commentator, and it's a massive upgrade because, as we've talked about before, Taz is the only guy who's ever been able to make Michael Cole remotely listenable as a play-by-play guy. He's the only guy, for whatever reason, that it just didn't drive me up a wall to hear Cole calling matches. So we're lucky to have Taz here. This show is on the new TNN, as we're told over and over and over again by Michael Cole. And we hear that as first we see Billy and Chuck, the tag team champions, are on their way out to the ring, accompanied by your close longtime personal friend, and fellow mutton chop lover, at least back in the day, Rico.
Yeah, the Deemer create a wrestler come to life in Rico. Yes, absolutely.
Rico is the personal stylist of Billy and Chuck, because you can't ever call anyone a manager in WWE at this point. So he's the personal stylist. Billy and Chuck, that being Billy Gunn and Chuck Palumbo, are the tag team champions. And I'm always shocked here that in 2002, the tag titles were still those classic belts from the late 80s through the 90s.
Great belts. Yeah.
I'd say the quintessential iconic version of the WWF, WWE, however many different versions of tag titles they have now.
Their challengers are the natural team of Mark Henry and Randy Orton.
Yes, this is
and it's rookie bike shorts version of Randy Orton.
Oh, you talk about a creator wrestler. This is Randy Orton OVW School Creator Wrestler Edition. Very, very early on in his WWE main roster tenure on SmackDown. It's also great because they don't inform us ahead of time who the challengers are going to be. So it's Billy and Chuck coming out first, which is always weird, as the tag team champions. And then Mark Henry gets introduced in his blue singlet, looking huge like Mark Henry. And then the mind wanders and you're thinking, who in 2002 WWE on the SmackDown roster, as if anyone could remember who was on which roster at that point, who could be Mark Henry's tag team partner? If you gave me 50 guesses, Randy Orton would not have been there. But here he is, coming out as a happy, smiling babyface. And I guess not all that shockingly, but Michael Cole and Taz correctly point out that this is a man who is in his first weeks in the company, but will be a future star of this business. That is, in fact, correct. No matter how brightly he shines as a star, however, he will not shine as brightly as Rico's incredible green shirt here.
Everything about Rico is incredible. I'm a huge fan, huge supporter. So Chuck and Mark Henry start out. And after a lockup...
I was a little worried here that it was Chuck Palumbo and Mark Henry starting.
Yeah, after a lockup, Henry just throws Chuck outside. Chuck runs back in, gets nailed by Henry. Henry missed a charge in the corner, but another big shot by Henry, and then Chuck collapses into the corner, hugs Billy's waist, and makes the tag. And this is a common theme with Billy and Chuck, is the teasing. Are they gay? Are they not?
Yes.
Is the tease, and it of course leads to one of the worst segments, but probably one of the most successful segments in the Billy and Chuck wedding
with Eric Bischoff.
Yes,
at that moment.
Yes.
I did want to note here that I'm contradicting myself, saying how tolerable Michael Cole here was on this show. As Chuck, as you mentioned, hits several punches, but runs into a huge forearm from Mark Henry, as if there's any other option when you're getting hit by a forearm from Mark Henry than for it to be huge. That Michael Cole calls a shoulder knockdown.
Orton and Billy, they're in, and we get arm drags and 2 high drop kicks by Orton.
Yes, in case you forgot that Randy Orton has an Okada-level drop kick, he was showing us here. Orton looked great in this very, what would seem now unfamiliar role for him. He attempts to follow those drop kicks up with a hip toss, but Billy, that being Billy Gunn, hits an awesome counter DDT out of the hip toss. I've seen other guys do that. I know that was a Tommy Dreamer favorite. I didn't recall seeing Billy Gunn do that very often, but that looked very good. Chuck then comes in with a couple really nice elbow drops. Hard Irish whip into the corner, a bunch of punches. And this is where I note that, man, Chuck Palumbo is so much better at this point than he was just a year and a half earlier in WCW, teaming with the likes of Mark Jindrak and Sean O'Hare and all those guys.
Did he was Palumbo teaming with Sean Stasiak, or was that?
I don't know if
somebody else. Who was the perfect event? Was that the perfect event? Did I get that?
Oh my God! It may have been. It may have been.
So Chuck Palumbo's had a tough run of tag partners.
Yes, yes. Shockingly, while not exactly, I'm not going to say he's Ricky Steamboat or anything. Billy Gunn better tag partner to learn the ropes of the pro wrestling industry and the actual doing of a pro wrestling match than Sean Stasiak or Sean O'Hare.
Absolutely true. And the crowd starts chanting loud Rico sucks chants. They are wrong in their analysis.
Amazing that you could feel so strongly to the positive side for Rico Constantino, but Greg the Hammer Valentine, you just can't get there with.
Those are bookends of awesome right there. There's a lot of room in between those two.
Yeah.
Billy and Orton are in. You get they clothesline each other. Billy tags in Chuck, and Orton tags in Henry, and Henry runs wild on both Billy and Chuck. He power slams Chuck, but Billy's there to make the save.
Then Henry powers through a double clothesline and hits a double clothesline of his own, going full Togi Makabe here. I definitely enjoyed that. He needs to come out with a chain like Makabe. I guess that was not in the cards here. Should also mention that just before this, we had the first of many mentions from Michael Cole and Taz about the episode of Confidential coming up immediately after the show. They will go behind the scenes with a look at Steve Austin walking out on the WWE this past week, no showing Raw.
Yeah, that was a lead into the King of the Ring that we reviewed.
Yes.
Back in, was that a season 1 or was that a Patreon? I can't remember, but I'm
pretty sure that's a season 1. I cannot fathom that a patron would have chosen that, and otherwise it wouldn't have ended up in there. So I'm pretty sure that's a late season 1 episode, which spoiler alert, Brock Lesnar wins the King of the Ring.
Yeah, so the whole Austin leaving was around him losing to Brock Lesnar in that King of the Ring tournament. And so I'm curious, just by how much they were plugging that Confidential, how hard they buried Austin on that Confidential. Yeah, I was tempted to go watch to see how hard they buried him on that.
Yeah, if I get a quiet moment at some point in the near future, I probably will throw that on just to hear both how they buried him and how ridiculously lopsided of an explanation it is. But yes, that is the first of many mentions of that. But back to the match.
Orton clotheslines Billy, and both men go up and over to the floor.
Like Cactus Jack style on a clothesline. I did not expect that from Randy Orton here. Randy Orton had something to prove here in this match, which is very different from the Randy Orton that you see a lot of times.
Yeah, no chin locks in this one from Randy Orton.
No, he was moving a mile a minute.
Henry has Chuck on his shoulders, but Rico gets on the apron. Henry puts Chuck down to go after Rico. Henry turns around and just eats a super kick.
A huge super kick from Chuck Palumbo. Another thing I had forgotten about him, that for all of his other deficiencies, Chuck Palumbo had two things: a great right hand, the best right hand punch you'll see this side of Bob Cook, and then a spectacular super kick, particularly for a guy that is a tall, not light man. He's a big built, all legs sort of guy. To see him hit that big of an extension on a super kick, and to the best of my knowledge, it's not like he has a legitimate martial arts background. Like, blood isn't running cold here. This is no Glacier.
No, it is not. After that huge super kick, Billy in and hits a famouser. Chuck with the cover and gets the pin. Still champions, Billy and Chuck. Velocity.
Yeah, totally fine. Did not mind this at all. It was a quick, probably no more than like 6-7 minutes, but a perfectly fine tag team title match on a TV show. In some ways, obviously not as good of a team, but it kind of reminded me of, if you were a fan in the Crockett days and you're watching NWA television, and you see the Midnight Express and they're defending against, like the U.S. tag titles against Tommy Rich and the Junkyard Dog or something.
I was wondering if you were going to land a Midnight Express Billy and Chuck comparison. I'm like, whoa, this is dangerous territory. I don't know if you're going to land this one.
No, I don't think there's any way you could. I would not even attempt to.
Good.
I will say, though, that they were a better team than I gave them credit for. Like, I did not mind them here at all.
No.
And when I look at Billy's other teams, like the New Age Outlaws, or who obviously were a very successful team, but just I didn't find really interesting in ring at all, or the Smoking Guns. And then you look at Palumbo's, smattering of teams in WCW with the likes of maybe a Stasiak or an O'Hare or Jindrak, any of those sorts of guys. I'll take this over any of those.
You heard a lot about Confidential coming up, but you also heard a lot about Stacker 2. Velocity is brought to you by Stacker 2.
It's also brought to you by Snickers Crunch or something like that.
I remember Stacker 2. It was a diet supplement.
Yes.
Which was basically ephedrine and caffeine pills. That's what it was. And so I looked it up and I'm like, whatever happened to Stacker 2? So I looked it up. In 2006, Stacker 2 released the, quote, 6-hour power energy shot. In 2010, it was the second best-selling energy shot behind 5-hour energy. So
wait,
the
Stacker 2 is
6-hour
still around? Wow.
The 6-hour power energy shot, not as good of a seller as the 5-hour energy shot. In 2016, it lost a $22 million lawsuit.
Wow.
Against 5-hour energy, which accused Stacker 2 of trademark infringement.
That's I was going to say, I wonder where this ranked or sort of the level of success where this fit in with Ico Pro.
That's right. It's got to be Stacker 2 had way more success, but boy, did it lose a lot in that lawsuit.
In the end, I think Stacker 2 may have won more, but I think Ico Pro lost less.
Very true. After commercial,
which is actually fairly amusing when you think about what they were meant to do.
Rikishi versus Albert.
My notes are back from commercial and here comes Rikishi. God damn it. And that is, again, it's no knock on Fatu. We've talked about him as a member of the Simone SWAT team.
100%.
We've talked about him in the very first episode of this podcast, season 1, as making a difference.
Yeah.
Fatu, which you got to go back and listen to episode 1 to hear the whole story of that character. But I was never a Rikishi guy, and I think I've told this story partially before, but the only WWE main roster show that I've ever been to was a house show in late 2003 that had a 6-man tag with Rikishi and Too Cool against, I can't remember who it was, but I just remember when Rikishi came out and everyone lost their minds, and I was just like, wow, I don't know if wrestling is for me anymore.
He
like,
was so
it was the
popular. Crazy.
Insane. And like, that was probably the only moment since my eyes first set upon pro wrestling at 3 years old. That moment at that house show is probably the only time I've ever had where I thought maybe wrestling isn't for me anymore. So every time I see him, I'm like, oh, I don't know that I can do this. And then his opponent is Harry Albert. It's the version of Albert that still has all the body hair. This is yet another version of this man in that he has nondescript black boots and trunks. He has the full body, chest and back hair. And then for some reason, he's wearing MMA gloves.
We've had every incarnation of Albert on this podcast. We've had the hip hop hippo, we've had the A Train, we've had Giant Bernard, we've got Albert. We've had them all. I think we completed the set with this one.
All the names, and then several sub variants of Albert himself. That gimmick. It is. He's a stealth regular on this podcast. We talked about season 2 that everywhere you looked, Cactus Jack was there.
Yeah.
Even places you didn't expect him to be. Meanwhile, Albert is he gets around here on this podcast, and this is just a weird look for him. That I don't get the MMA gloves. Like, there's nothing he does. This isn't like Kama, the Supreme Fighting Machine.
He wrestles exactly the same, no matter the outfit.
Yes,
he's exactly the same wrestler.
Yes, whether he's the hip hop hippo or the A Train or Giant Bernard, he's the same guy. My notes for this match are completely overwhelmed though by a sentence that Michael Cole says.
All right.
He says,
"Oh, it's at the beginning." What does he say?
He says, and I quote, "Before we have a lockup, Tough Enough 2 is changing this industry.
That's right.
He
did say
then
that.
goes on to describe, and Cole tries to, or Taz tries to, oh, Tough Enough is changing the industry, which isn't really a much better statement. And then they go on to say that stars like Nydia, Maven, Chris Nowinski, and a human being named Linda Miles, apparently, are going to carry this business into the next generation. Talk about hot takes exposed or old takes exposed, whatever
That's
that
right.
Twitter account is.
Freezing cold take right there.
Freezing cold takes. This is a permafrost level take.
Yeah, and if you want to hear about Tough Enough Season 3, that for sure we recapped in the Patreon feed over there. You can hear us recap an episode from Tough Enough 3. So Albert starts out with a beatdown in the corner, tries a sunset flip, but Rikishi just drops down as first.
Him.
Yes,
it's like
it's an inverted northern exposure.
He sits on his face. It's just he just doesn't bounce off the ropes. It's a short northern exposure. It's like the cut clothesline, the short arm clothesline by Jake Roberts. It's that version clothesline style, but for a northern exposure. Bonsai drop, whatever I'm going to call it. But here on this podcast, we honor the name of Big Josh whenever we can. So this was a short northern exposure.
Albert picks up Rikishi, but falls backward with too much weight.
I always love that. The my opponent is too fat.
Too fat. Albert reversed Rikishi, gave him 2 avalanches into the corner, and then...
He does. Before we get to that, though, 2 more things. First, we have another confidential plug. And then we have another sentence that I know this happened. I have the vaguest memory of like one backstage segment where this man was a part of this group, but it's one of those like things where it feels like it's being said in an alternate reality because it was so short-lived and so weird. This sentence is, Shawn Michaels is back on Raw to revitalize the NWO.
That's right.
Real sentence about a real thing that happened on Monday Night Raw.
2002.
we also, in this confidential plug, we have Taz basically telling us that everything we're watching on this show is fake, but the Steve Austin situation with him walking out of WWE is as real can be.
Oh, I hate that on my wrestling show.
Yes, this was like I expected to hear something like that on like the first Nitro after Bash to the Beach 2000.
Into the steps outside, they throw Rikishi back in. 2 splashes by Albert, but only a 2 count.
Yes, 2 splashes. So he's not fat enough, apparently, to use a splash as a finisher. I feel like the one-man gang or Hakeem is the cutoff over how fat you can be while doing a non-top rope splash and still get a pin. The A-Train Albert, he does not cross that threshold. Another time capsule of a line, though, or of a mention, as Michael Cole is talking about Reverend Devon.
Ooh, that's right. This is the Reverend Devon.
Waiting for a Deacon Batista run in
Deacon
here.
Batista. After the breakup of the Dudley Boys led to the Reverend Devon character managed by Deacon Dave, who would eventually go on to become Dave Batista. So
yes, because we had the brand split where Devon went to SmackDown as Reverend Devon with Deacon Batista. And then on Raw, we had for a short period of time, Bubba Ray Dudley basically cosplaying Dusty Rhodes in a brief feud with Triple H.
We get a Samoan drop counter by Rikishi, but he misses an ass attack into the corner, and we get a
standing variety, so we won't call that a northern exposure.
No, and
it's a hip attack. It's a Koshinaka Taguchi special.
Bicycle kick by Albert, but only a 2 count again. Albert goes to the top. He gets. Let me pause for a minute there. Albert goes to the top.
Yes, as he is wont to do.
He's wont to do.
Albert, the high flyer, the hip hop hippo, Air Albert. He is going to the top rope.
He gets crotched by Rikishi, and this time he hits the ass attack in the corner. A super kick by Rikishi. Bonsai drop in the corner.
Second rope, northern exposure.
There it is, and he gets the pin. Rikishi then finds a hat on the stage and he
I need to
leads to him
communicate
dancing.
my progression of emotions here, because he hits the second rope Northern Exposure and gets the win. I'm like, oh man, one of my favorite moves. I'm happy Rikishi wins. I say it's one of my favorite moves. It is and it isn't, but for the purposes of the show, we'll say that it is. But he gets the pin and then he immediately leaves, and I'm so happy. I write
there
down
was no dancing,
no stink face, no dancing. I love Velocity. Then Michael Cole says Saturday night is all right for dancing. They cut to the stage. A random top hat appears.
No, it's like a it's like a fedora almost. Yeah, like it just
like a bowler
randomly on the stage for no reason.
It appears. It's like the lights went out and Undertaker's in the ring, but instead it's the stage and it's this hat. Then Michael Cole says a direct quote, "The big man, 300 pounds of fun." Then Rikishi starts dancing with an obscene amount of pyro.
So much pyro for this dance.
They are.
You would think Goldberg was coming out with the amount of pyro.
10 Goldbergs were coming out simultaneously. This was still WWE being firmly entrenched in the "we beat WCW" era of pyro. They're still celebrating on a weekly basis. And this segment ends with Michael Cole saying, Rikishi and WWE deliver each week here on Velocity.
We get a video recap of Vince McMahon defeating Ric Flair for full control of the company.
I almost turned the streaming service off. I almost threw a remote through my television. This is one of the things I blocked out from my mind. This was, in some ways, I guess, this was their backup plan from what was originally going to be happening with Austin, I guess, is kind of the way it came off, at least on TV.
We see highlights of Austin beating Flair, and then Austin walked out at this point because of the King of the Ring with Lesnar.
And the story was supposed to be, it was Austin versus Flair, and the loser had to be the winner's personal assistant.
Yeah, but they ended up scrapping that and then just having a match with McMahon and Flair for full control of the company, which McMahon won.
It's a very Seinfeldian stipulation when you think about it. The Butler thing.
Yes.
It feels like the pilot to Jerry's NBC show on Seinfeld. But sadly, we did not get that to play out. Instead, this is what happens.
No, we see highlights of the McMahon-Flair match. Bloody Flair has Vince in a figure four. And then Brock Lesnar shows up and attacks Ric Flair, hits an F5, and that's how Vince won the match.
What was the deal with Arn here too? Because Arn's in the ring, like getting up in Vince's face. Then Lesnar comes out and Arn bails, but he bails in a way that makes you think that he's in on the on screwing Flair out of the company. I don't know if that's what they were going for here. I don't really recall, but it came off kind of weird.
Well, it gets weirder. The Fabulous Moolah and Mae Young come out.
What?
And then I'm like, what the hell? We just go to commercial. That was it. What happened?
Fabulous Moolah and Mae Young come out. The most generic rock and roll 50s music you've ever heard in your life is blaring as they come out. We get a graphic talking about Fabulous Moolah's autobiography and saying she has stories to tell. And boy, are there stories to tell. Editor's note. So they get in the ring, and then we immediately go to a graphic saying Kurt Angle versus Hardcore Holly later tonight. And we go to commercial, and then we come back, and there's no Moolah and Mae Young. What was that?
I have no clue what this was for. I guess just to plug the Moolah book, but just really weird. They came out, did nothing. We went to commercial.
Nothing that made me think I need that book.
No.
If anything, I was like, wow, these people are so unimportant that they're not even going to do anything. They just, I did not get this at all. This was very strange.
We see a recap of the Hurricane, Nydia, Jamie Noble feud, which I believe we recapped for a different pay-per-view show that they.
We recapped that for the Global Warning Tour show.
That was
we reviewed over on the Patreon, where the best part about that show was like Jamie Noble and Nydia on the beaches of Australia being taught how to surf. and they're in the middle of being in a storyline, just being the most reprehensible, like sleazy, dirty, slimy heels. And then in this segment on this Global Warning Tour show, they are the most likable, genuine, gracious, appreciative human beings you've ever seen in your entire life. But yeah, this is just a beat earlier in that storyline. And this is actually leading to the in-ring television debut of Jamie Noble.
That's right. Jamie Noble with Nydia making his debut, taking on Sho Funaki.
Yes, God, Funaki was there forever.
He started with the Kaientai gimmick, right?
Like, yeah, so he was part of the Kaientai group in Michinoku Pro with Taka Michinoku and Dick Togo and Men's Teo and Shiru, who would go on to be Kaz Hayashi. And then improbably, he's the one who stuck.
He stayed
in WWE for like a decade plus, probably closer to 2 decades. But yeah, it is Jamie Noble's debut against Funaki. And the thing that I had tried to block out of my mind, but clearly there was going to be no chance of doing that here, was how often they were going to say, Michael Cole mostly, that Nydia is a freak.
Oh God. Yep. It's all Noble early, and I'm watching him go, and I love his intensity. So good. We get an electric chair, then a quick makeout leads to a roll-up.
Yeah, that electric chair drop was awesome, by the way, because Funaki went for a victory roll up on the shoulders, and Noble just killed him with that electric chair. And as you talked about watching Noble here in this match, my thought was how much Jamie Noble 100% fit in and was on the level of, 7 years earlier when Benoit, Malenko, Guerrero, those guys came into WCW. Noble had the same sort of just fundamentals and just snap on every little thing that he did. Just was very cool to see here. And again, I was longing to see like this vintage of Jamie Noble, or even several years later when he had his great run in Ring of Honor. I would have loved to have seen this guy in a mainstream company when he was at that level that actually pushed cruiserweights, or at least did something with them other than what WWE did with them, I guess.
Huge clothesline by Noble. Hits a backbreaker for a 2 count. More Noble offense, and I'm here for it.
Yes.
He counters an abdominal stretch into a hip toss. Funaki does hit a flying head scissors and a bulldog.
No, it's a leg scissors, because that's what Michael Cole calls it, right. A flying leg scissors. Cole also, while Noble has Funaki and a surfboard, Cole is talking about how the WWE's cruiserweight division, it's full of high flyers. I'm like, who? Name one.
Oh, the Hurricane will do a crossbody every now and then off the top.
Yeah, like that's the thing that the cruiserweight division wasn't, and that's why nobody cared, because it was just smaller guys. It was smaller guys doing the same WWE 6-minute match that the bigger guys were doing while being smaller. And he's attempting to say how Noble is so different from everyone else in the cruiserweight division. I'm like, he's different in that he's better.
Yeah,
but
he can do that style that you just described better than anybody else. Like,
but
absolutely.
It's not like we've got a sea of Rey Mysterios and Jushin Ligers flying around the ring and being grounded by Jamie Noble here.
A dragon screw into the trailer hitch submission for the pin. Jamie Noble successful in his debut with WWE.
Yeah, and looked great doing so. That trailer hitch, which is basically like it's like an inverted Indian deathlock. In some ways, almost reminded me. He kind of steps up with it, but in some ways, it reminded me of the original finisher for Triple H when he was in WCW versus Terror Rising and then Jean-Paul Levesque.
We get a recap of Undertaker versus the aforementioned Triple H before the King of the Ring match. And again, you can hear us recap that in season 1 of this podcast. I don't know if you remember that match, but I'm watching this build up to that match, and I'm like, I remember that match from recapping it in season 1. And everyone should go listen to that.
Yeah, that is. It was an experience. I At first it's a weird way that this recap starts because we get this very very quick WWE rewind from Snickers Cruncher, and then when that ends, we have like a Michael Cole voiceover, and that then picks up the recap in long form from where that Snickers Cruncher rewind segment ended. Just kind of a weird way of doing it. This whole thing was just weird. Triple H is a face, Taker is like being aligned with Vince. Then Taker running away from Triple H after Triple H throws off the security. That was strange. Triple H holds the show hostage, says, "You bring Undertaker's ass out here, you don't have a show." He starts destroying the table, starts destroying the cheap monitors, is going to destroy a standard definition camera in 2002 that it somehow is $50,000. I don't buy it. I also don't buy that Vince McMahon is going to be forced to make a match he doesn't want to make because a guy's going to break a $50,000 camera. Maybe in like 1996 or early 1997 when the company was running low on cash. But anyway, that was the build here.
We get another recap where we see Angle getting pantsed by Hunter, Hogan taking off the headgear. This is after Angle had lost the hair match to Edge, I believe, and he was wearing a wig with headgear, holding the wig on, which was a fantastic post-hair loss gimmick. Loved it. And then we see Hogan here taking the headgear and wig off of Angle. And then Angle gets left laying by a Triple H pedigree.
Only Kurt Angle could pull this off and be so ridiculous and look like such a joke, but still be taken seriously as a wrestler. Just such a, we've talked about it before, such a unique character and just a singular guy in terms of being able to be so good at comedy and be the butt of so many jokes, but then be taken so seriously, rightfully so, as such a legitimate wrestler and threat in big matches. We had to, I guess, to kind of tie that knot or put a bow on that, after Triple H held the show hostage and forced Vince to give him a match with Taker. Vince gave him a match, but it was who was it? It was Taker and Angle against Hogan and Triple H was going to be the match, but then Taker and Angle attack Hogan backstage, so it's a handicap match. There's a whole bunch of shenanigans and chicanery, and then, like you said, that's the whole deal where Hogan comes back out and beats up Angle, and they pants him and rip off the wig and
the headgear, yeah.
And then Hogan hits the leg drop in 2002, and I'm like, man, oof, you are not going to be able to walk really soon from now. Don't do that move.
Shocking still how popular Hogan was at this point in 2002.
Yes.
We talk about probably the peak of this second Hogan run being the WrestleMania in 2003, which conveniently we recapped in season 1 of this podcast. So you can
Hogan versus Vince McMahon.
That's right. So we're told before the main event of this Velocity episode, we're told that 2 weeks ago, Kurt Angle beat Hardcore Bob Holly by rolling him up and holding the ropes to cheat for the pin.
Not only are we told about that, we then, when we come back from commercial, or maybe it's before we go to commercial, we see a replay from SmackDown, or from SmackDown or from Raw, but it is from 2 years prior. 2 years ago. I could not believe that they actually showed this and like worked this into the story from 2 years prior, where Angle had hit a top rope moonsault onto Hardcore Holly that
broke his arm.
It broke his arm and kept him out for nearly 2 years. How bad of a break was that?
First off, awesome moonsault. Unfortunate that he landed on the arm of Bob Holly, but
there's a reason why, as beautiful as Kurt Angle's moonsault is, 98% of the time the guy moves out of the way, and this is why, because he gets so high into the air, and then as he reaches the sort of the peak of that jump, and then flips and comes back down, he comes down with such force that unless he lands perfectly, perpendicular stomach to stomach, it is going to be painful. And that is exactly what it was here. This was brutal. He lands full weight, both knees onto it looked like the forearm or the wrist maybe. It did not look pleasant.
Angle comes out first, and he's got the wig and headgear on again. I approve of this. His opponent, like I mentioned, is Hardcore Holly.
What was with Hardcore Holly not getting an intro? This was really strange. So he comes out, he does not get an intro from the ring announcer, and then Taz does the ring introduction
does
himself.
The introduction, yeah, in the commentary, and makes
really
a crack. He makes a crack about it, like, okay, Schimmel, I guess I'll do it.
Really weird.
Yeah.
This almost felt like that Global Warning Tour show where it was Taz and Cole, but they knew that Vince wasn't ever going to see it, so they were just cracking themselves up and just saying a bunch of weird stuff. This felt like that.
Yeah, I could only assume that maybe Tony Schimmel either had audio problems or had an incorrect introduction during the Hardcore Holly thing, and they just edited it off the broadcast and had Taz overdub it.
Maybe he accidentally called him Thurman Sparky Plug.
Angle jumps Holly right away. Holly fights back, goes for the wig, but Angle bails out. Back in the ring, Holly with a power slam gets a near fall. Angle catches him and hits 3 belly-to-belly overhead suplexes. He goes for the 4th, but Holly counters into a DDT. And at this point, I realized that Teddy Long is our referee.
Yes, I had the same realization later into the match, but I was like, God, this is part of that bizarre career trajectory from Teddy Long, where he goes from referee in the NWA to star manager to disappearing from pro wrestling to referee in WWE in the early 2000s to commissioner of SmackDown or general manager of SmackDown. What an odd career arc for Teddy Long.
And I'm watching Teddy Long as referee here, and it's always amazing. Teddy Long in 2002 looks 20 years younger than Teddy Long in 1987.
Oh, 100%. The Teddy Long that we see here looks so much younger than the Teddy Long that brought Doom to the ring on that Clash of the Champions. I think it was the one with Flair and Funk that we reviewed.
That's a Patreon.
Yeah. One of those on the Patreon or in season 1. It was just, 100% agree. Not only an odd career arc, but like reverse aging.
Yeah. So we get a huge backdrop by Holly, clotheslines, and a drop kick by Hardcore Holly for a 2 count. He then power bombs Kurt Angle for a 2 count again. And I'm like, there's way too much Hardcore Holly offense here for my liking. I wanted Angle to kill this guy.
There is, but it's an odd situation because Kurt Angle, obviously, big star, is going to be a big part of King of the Ring. But then you have the actual King of the Ring tournament, which is underway. The quarterfinals are going to be coming up on the following week on Raw and SmackDown before the semis and the finals are on the pay-per-view. And Bob Holly is in that tournament coming up. I believe on Raw in a couple of days, he's wrestling Test. And so
I'm so glad we didn't have to watch that match.
Yeah. So by the way, the quarterfinals, and you can hear about the semifinals and the finals by going back and listening to the episode in season 1, where we talk about that King of the Ring pay-per-view from 2002. But the quarterfinals, which will be coming up on Raw and SmackDown the following week, it's Bob Holly versus Test, the Big Valboski versus Chris Jericho, Rob Van Dam versus X-Pac, and Booker T versus Brock Lesnar. So even though looking at that lineup, I'd say Bob Holly, whoever comes out of Bob Holly versus Test is the least likely guy to win the tournament. Still, I guess, they were trying to keep him strong in this match, but it definitely stuck out as just one of those, like, why are you making this match right now? Just have Angle wrestle somebody else of similar stature that isn't in the tournament. Also talking about King of the Ring on the commentary, Michael Cole is talking about I believe it was 2 years earlier, Kurt Angle winning the King of the Ring. And Cole says it, quote, jump-started the kid Angle's career. And Taz just starts laughing and making fun of Cole, like, you're calling Angle a kid? And Cole's like, yeah, that was pretty dumb.
So they grapple for position, and Angle gets a German suplex. Holly counters a second German suplex attempt into a roll-up for a 2 count. Angle then picks the ankle of Holly and slaps on an ankle lock in the middle of the ring. Nobody can pick an ankle with the speed and intensity and just technical awesomeness of Kurt Angle. The way he just explodes and takes the guy down. The dude's a legit Olympic gold medalist. Like, yeah. It's awesome to see. It's awesome to see in a pro
the way
wrestling.
He does it out of positions or while locked into a different hold, like, oh, there's no logical way, or there's no way that he can quickly go from this into the ankle lock. And every single time, he's able to do it.
Holly rolls and kicks Angle off to counter the ankle lock. We get a belly-to-belly suplex by Hardcore Holly for a long 2 count.
Spoiler alert, if you haven't watched this show, Bob Holly, not as good at belly-to-belly suplexes as Kurt Angle.
Yeah, I would have chose a different move after Angle was doing a bunch of them earlier in the match.
Granted, this is a different style belly-to-belly. Kurt Angle's is the,
overhead throw.
Lock, overhead throw, pop the hips and throw the guy over. This is more of your Magnum TA Shane Douglas style belly-to-belly, but still nowhere near the quality of either of those guys' version of the belly-to-belly.
Holly goes for the Alabama Slam, but Angle counters. He has him by the ropes. He grabs the ropes again, shades of 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
And he gets the pin over Hardcore Holly in the exact same way. And the show goes off the air.
Holly looked like such a loser here, getting beat this way again.
I loved it.
I think my favorite thing on this show, though, was how hard Teddy Long worked at making sure he didn't see Kurt Angle holding the ropes. He's counting this pin, and his head is pointed directly at the mat, like a millimeter from the mat. And then as he counts 3, he turns his head and looks away in a way to ensure that his eyes never see Angle holding the ropes. It was particularly on the replay angle they showed before it went off the air. I howled with laughter. A couple other things about this match. I really, really liked, you talked about a little bit, a couple of Kurt Angle's belly-to-belly suplexes where he went to Irish whip Holly into the corner, but halfway through held on to the Irish whip and pulled him back toward himself. Angle pulled Holly back toward himself and hit a belly-to-belly. That was very cool. The other thing in ring that I noted is that apparently we're in 2001 WCW here, because Bob Holly hangs Kurt Angle over the top rope and then just proceeds to kick him directly in the testicles.
Yeah, he did.
And this is legal. Nobody says anything.
Taunting his opponent in the King of the Ring tournament test.
Yes. The ref does nothing. The ref says nothing. The announcers say nothing. This is just a legal hold here. I guess it's an early 2000s officiating quirk, both in the dying days of WCW and here in WWE. We get not one, but 2 plugs, by the way, for Confidential during this match, both in the middle and then immediately after the finishes, we go off the air.
So the show's off the air. That was Velocity. It would descend into just a geek nothing show, and then eventually make its way to WWE.com and then off the air. But for this show, this had a lot of the vibes of the early Shotgun Saturday Night we watched, the early Sunday Night Heat that we watched. Vince McMahon and The Rock were on that early Sunday Night Heat. So it had vibes of like, we're trying to launch a show, so we're gonna put some real guys on it.
But everyone by this point, because again, you mentioned Sunday Night Heat, you mentioned Shotgun Saturday Night, which in season 2 we have episodes that talk about those shows and the trajectory of those shows in detail. But I think by this point, everyone knew that this is, that what happened to those shows was going to happen to Velocity. Like
100%.
They never kept interest in these shows that weren't Raw or SmackDown. And they always ended up the same way. When I was watching this, though, and then thinking about the trajectory of the show, it is in so many ways like this sister city program, the spiritual cousin of Thunder. It's 1 hour, but otherwise it's the same thing where it started off where it obviously wasn't an A show, it was a B show, but some of the stars were there and there were things that happened, and then it just became an absolute, they could have called, instead of Afterburn, they could have called it Afterthought, and it would have been more accurate. But yeah, I mean, the show itself was fine. The wrestling action was fine. Really, all three matches I think were really similar in that they weren't spectacular. You won't remember them an hour after you watch the show, but I guess outside of the Rikishi match, which I forgot already because I said 3 matches, but the other 3, totally fine. Perfectly fine way to spend 5 or 6 minutes. Kurt Angle looked great like he always does in this match with Hardcore Holly, and it was an hour of TV, I guess is the best way to say it.
Yeah, Billy and Chuck were a fine team. We got to see Jamie Noble do Jamie Noble things, and
for the first time on WWE television.
Yeah, and Kurt Angle's great. So this was it was a totally fine hour of television. Do you have a favorite thing on the show?
Oh man, that's I would actually say it's a very small thing, but it's what I described, those belly to belly suplexes by Kurt Angle, where he would tease an Irish whip and then hold on and bring the guy back in and hit the belly to belly suplex. I guess zooming out, it would be Kurt Angle in general. And then you mentioned Jamie Noble already, but I think maybe the most surprising thing was, again, it's not like they were incredible, but how much I enjoyed Billy and Chuck as a tag team here. It made me want to see more of them against better teams.
Yeah, for me, it was seeing those classic tag team championship belts still around in 2002. That was fantastic. Everything Jamie Noble did. This character, we talked about it in depth on that Global Warning show. This character, Jamie Noble, played it to perfection, and it's a great character for just the crazy West Virginia hillbilly guy.
And Nydia was great too. Nydia was the perfect person to put with him. Like, you wouldn't have thought that when you're watching Tough Enough, but that act was great together.
It was great, and so that was fun here, and just watching Kurt Angle do Kurt Angle things in his prime is always something special. We've talked about it at length here. Every time we see him, you took him for granted.
Wrestler.
Yeah, everyone who watched him, you took him for granted. He was so great. And when you go back, it's the same thing when we see like Kurt Hennig, when we go back and watch Mr. Perfect matches, and we're like, oh man, he is better than I remember, and I took him for granted. And I get a lot of those same vibes with Kurt Angle in his prime as well.
Well, I think part of it too with Angle is that he was in an era where, particularly at that point, where WWE had so many stars and so many great wrestlers that, like, you knew he was great, but to me it took time and distance, and also kind of the thinning out, particularly in WWE, of the high level talent for you to realize how truly incredible he was, and how almost singularly remarkable it was that he was that great almost right out of the chute. The only comparison I can make to it, and it's another guy with a very strong, legitimate amateur wrestling athletic background, but for the Big Audio Nightmare listeners in particular, Jun Akiyama would be maybe the only other comp I can make in terms of a guy who right out of the gate, like first match, was just like, oh my God, this guy is incredible. How are you that good that quickly? And then obviously with Angle, you tack onto it just the character and the comedic timing and everything. It's always a joy to see, like you said, Kurt Angle doing Kurt Angle things in his prime on any television show or any pay-per-view. No matter if it's a very significant match, as we've watched several of his, or the epitome of a throwaway match and show like it was here.
Worst thing on the show for you, was it Rikishi's dancing?
Yeah, I think that's a very personal thing for me. But it was, for me, it was the moment. It was the moment where I realized that I wasn't going to get away with seeing Rikishi without that. Because they built me up by seeing him leave right away. I'm like, I even wrote like, it's really strange, but I'm like, I'm good with it. And then we got the dance. Thankfully, though,
I could just picture you on the couch yelling, Don't pick up that hat. Leave that hat alone. Do not pick up that hat. Oh, man, he picked up the hat. There we go.
It's not too far off. I think undoubtedly the worst thing and the weirdest thing on this show was the Fabulous Moolah Mae Young.
So weird.
It was just, it seemed like they got to the end of like booking this show or taping this show before SmackDown and were like, we need 40 more seconds. Send Moolah and May out. And then, like, after SmackDown, they sent them out.
Yeah, for me, it was the Moolah May stuff, and then the just the constant, incessant talk of Confidential.
Yes,
just
accurate.
Too much plugging to tell you how they're going to bury Steve Austin in the next hour.
Well, I'm actually going to amend. By far, the worst thing on the show was from that, and I mentioned it earlier. It was Taz telling us that everything we were watching on this show was fake, but that's right. Going to be
that's real. Yes, so
that's the worst.
That's always the worst on any wrestling show.
100%. Anytime any announcer says it on a wrestling show, it doesn't matter if I'm trying. If there were 4 Greg Valentine matches on the show, that will be the worst thing if an announcer starts talking.
No, and it's timeless. Like in 2021, when Jim Ross makes a comment about how something is.
He talked about a match being logical.
It was
exactly
that
on a pay-per-view in 2021, and I'm like that match made sense. Like, are you doing a watch-along podcast of the show, or are you calling the show? And
so it's a timeless frustration.
It is, and everyone knows how much we love Jim Ross on this show, vintage Jim Ross. But everyone, we talk about Tony Schiavone in the days of WCW, Vince Russo doing that, but no one seemingly is immune to it because Jim Ross has done it in modern times. Here, Taz of all people did it, so it's never good.
All right, and with that, we're going to wrap it up. I do want to remind everyone that you heard us mention the Patreon throughout the show. We can't do this show without your support, and of course, all of the patrons that are supporting us at patreon.com/wrestlingatRandom keep the show going, keep us able to do this show twice a week. For those patrons, they get an episode, they get a bonus feed where we have the Global Warning show that we mentioned and the Tough Enough show we mentioned. All those are in the bonus feed. There's a ton of bonus content over there. We put out a show every single week there, so you can sign up at patreon.com/wrestlingatRandom. You can also subscribe right from the Apple Podcast app. If you go to our feed, you see it in there right now. You're looking, if you're on Apple Podcasts, you can see where it says bonus content. If you click on that, you subscribe in the Apple Podcast app, you unlock all of those bonus episodes. Hours and hours of bonus content are waiting for you right now. Just by subscribing for 1 month, it unlocks all of that content for you.
Absolutely. And the other thing we should mention is that even during the season break, which we just came off of, even during the season breaks for our patrons, we continue doing weekly shows on the bonus feed. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of shows there on the Patreon/Apple Podcast bonus content feed. And they're all immediately unlocked when you go when you support us there, when you subscribe to those to that feed. So even if you listen to every episode on the free feed, there are hours upon hours of Wrestling at Random content waiting for you on the bonus side.
And when you listen to this content, we love to interact with you. We love to hear about your memories of these shows the first time you're hearing about these shows. Did it make you go back and watch it? What did you think of this stuff? We love to interact with everyone, and we try to respond to everybody. So the best way to interact with the show is via Twitter at WrestleAtRandom, the same for Instagram, Facebook.com/WrestlingAtRandom as well, or you can send us an email, wrestlingatrandom@gmail.com. All of those ways to interact with the show. We respond to every single one of them. Look forward to hearing from you and all of our listeners. We couldn't do it without you. We love it. We love hearing about how much you enjoy the show and how much you enjoy the shows we review. So absolutely keep it up. And with that, we're going to wrap this one up. Adam, thanks for joining us this week.
Thank you, Jeremy. I can't say that I had on my docket this week to watch an episode of Velocity, but that is what the randomizer brings into our lives, and I'm here for it.
And I want to thank everyone for listening. We'll talk to you again next time.